No, I'm not from a racing family, and there's no history of motor racing in my family or cars in particular. I remember really I was naturally always interested in cars. I've no idea why. If there was ever a race on TV, I would watch it. And then my dad actually used to go on the train. He used to work in Victoria in London. And he used to get on the train at Bracknell and take the train ride into town. And one day he sat opposite a guy on the train that was reading a karting magazine. And he thought, that looks interesting. And he bought the magazine off him on the train. This guy, I think, may have been involved in karting, I don't know. But Dad came home with this magazine, couldn't believe it. There was a world of karting. You know, you could actually go and you could own a kart and go racing. It just couldn't believe this was actually was a thing that you could go and do. So again, going through the old scrapbook, it's my very first day in my first go-kart. I think I was about 14 years old, and I just, you know, I couldn't believe that I was so lucky to have a go-kart and actually to go out and practice it, and racing was just incredible. So our first race was memorable, not for the right reasons. And the bit that I hadn't been told about is that when a go-kart race doesn't start, the start line, I couldn't see the start line marshal, he's miles away from me, and he didn't put the flag up. I didn't know these rules, I didn't know what this meant either. So this means another rolling lap. So the drivers in front of you wave their hand to say the race hasn't started, we're doing another rolling lap. No one told me this, didn't know what was going on. Got to start line, I'm now flat out down the straight. And as the mist now drops and all the spray drops, you now see what you're doing. I'm doing about 60 miles an hour. Everyone else is doing about 20 miles an hour, straight in front. Hit the guy in front, broke my foot. So my first race, back of the ambulance and off to Heatherwood Hospital to try and fix my foot. So parents weren't very pleased about that. That was my first race car. And I bought that. I went to I remember going to the bank. I was 18 years old, 19 years old. And I went to the bank and I said, I'd like to borrow £6,000 please and they said, why is that? In those are the days you had to go to the bank manager and ask, and he'd ask, why would you want the money? And I said, I want to buy a racing car. He said, no, and crossed that one off on your way. So I then went back about 2 weeks later and said, I'd like to borrow £6,500. He said, what for? I said, I'm going to buy an XR2. He said, okay, but only if we write the cheque to the car dealer where you're buying the car. Right. Luckily, I knew someone in the trade, so I sorted it out and I bought an XR2. I think about a month later, I sold that XR2 and then bought my racing car with the money. So there's means and ways of making it happen. But that was my first racing car. It was a Royale RP33. So phoned up a couple of circuits, and I've got a Formula Ford, I want to come and do a race. And Castle Combe was the first race. Turned up to there with my Cortina and my Formula Ford in the trailer for our first race, thinking that this was just going to be a club race. It was the British Formula Ford Championship. I'm clueless what race I just entered myself into, and turned up against all these works teams, and people were very professional and knew what they were doing. I had no idea what I was doing. So me and two mates turned up and went out for this qualifying session, drove around for a bit in the rain, and to my amazement, we weren't completely last. We were somewhere in the back of the pack, but nowhere near the pace of the front-running guys at all. And did our first race. My first race, Castle Combe, in the rain, in a British Championship, in a car which was, you know, I don't know what it was now, 8 years old or something at the time, with an engine that we built from a Haynes manual. But that was our first race in a car race. So utterly frightening, fantastic, brilliant, loved it. So that was, well, our first race at Castle Combe. Next race was at Cadwell Park. Cadwell Park's still one of my favourite tracks, amazing place, but it just felt like I'd stolen a car and was driving around a country lane. It's just the most amazing place with hills and drops and blind corners and high-speed stuff and first gear hairpin. I mean, just an amazing place.
Coy leads, Coulthard second, Polaris in third position.
I had to work at it. I had to suddenly get myself together and suddenly realise we were stepping up to a different level here. Other guys in the championship, Calvin Burt, who's my teammate, he'd been doing it for a couple of years before, so he was the pace setter. Part of this new upstart Scottish lad called Coulthard, he came on the scene, and he was amazingly quick, straight from the word go. He won the first race by quite a margin. I think I was 8th or something, but there was 20-something cars on the grid, but I was into the top 10, but utterly disappointed in myself that, I've now got this opportunity, but I was nowhere near the podium at all. I can't remember, it was 89, 90 where there was Black Monday where the world fell apart financially. I'd actually made the decision that I was going to leave work, actually. So I left work, sold my flat, moved back home with Mum, and was now focused. I'm going to go and find the money. I'm going to make this work. The reality was there was companies were laying people off because the financial crisis that was around. So the last thing they want to do is give money to some nobody to go motor racing. It was just an almost impossible situation. But I was determined to find a way of making it happen. I found a deal. I did a test with it was with Derek Bell Racing. I was offered from one of the guys that was at that team. He joined a Dutch team, and during that year they had a drive at the Spanish Grand Prix. I'd done this test at Pembrey. That's the only time I'd ever driven one of these cars before, and now going to a circuit I'd never been to before, and asked to go, do one practice, qualifying and a race. No idea what I was doing really. I remember because I didn't know the track at all. But I thought, as bold as I was, I'll go and ask a Grand Prix driver where the racing line is and what to look for, etc. So I literally walked in the back of the paddock. This is how open Formula One was those days. I remember walked in the back of the paddock, didn't know anybody at all, and saw Derek Warwick, a British Grand Prix driver, who was just walking into the back of his truck. And I said, excuse me, Mr. Warwick, could I have 10 minutes with you? He said, well, yeah, well, sure, what's up? And I explained who I was, didn't know what I was doing, first race. She said, well, let's go and grab a coffee, we'll sit down and I'll talk to you around the track. I mean, how mad is that? Just walking out to a Grand Prix driver and saying, could you tell me about the circuit? I mean, just wouldn't happen today at all. But Derek was, as he's true today, utter gentleman, and spent 10, 15 minutes to have a cup of coffee and drew out the track and what sort of things to look for and what curbs to use, what not to use. I mean, it couldn't happen today, but that's what it was like. For the race itself, I think we started 20th or about 20, I think it was. Ended up near on last, as I couldn't work out why the car was getting so bad during the race. And I thought it was just very hot and just the tyres were going off. I didn't really understand the car at all. As it ended up, I think it was 5 bolts hold the engine onto the back of the chassis itself. It was an aluminium monocoque, and I think 2 of the bolts had come out, so this car was turning into the loosest car you can imagine, so it was all over the place. So how I managed to hang on to it was one thing, but I certainly wasn't going to get any sort of result from it. And on that day as well, I almost got run over by Ayrton Senna. Didn't notice him at the time, but I went to the shower block to go and have a shower one evening, and I was walking back from there with a towel around me and my wash bag, and this Honda Accord came from nowhere around the corner and literally just missed me. But it's only as we'd gone past, this bloke kind of was waving at it saying sorry, but it was actually Ayrton Senna, so I almost got run over by Ayrton Senna on that weekend as well. From that weekend, I started to learn who was quick, as in teams. What teams could prepare a quick car, and obviously the team I was with 3 bolts remaining, perhaps wasn't the team to go with, but you could see who were the quick teams and why certain drivers would work with certain teams and start to understand what was going on. So I made some contacts, and then again, just trying to find the money to go and do that. But could never find the money, and by this time I was instructing. And started instructing at Brands Hatch just to start earning some money because I wasn't working. On my first ever fast lap out, it was like new boy at school. Going out the pits, I've been hit going out the pits, being pushed out onto the track. My poor customer, I mean, no idea what was going on. I didn't know what I was doing, and he was clueless. We're driving out the track, I got hit from the car behind, and he knows who he is. I've then gone up into Druids, the first corner. The car in front has brake tested me, so I'm now trying to avoid them. The car behind me has now hit me again, and this is all first day at school stuff, but I didn't know what was going on. Started doing the my fast lap round. It's now turned into being part of a race. I've now got 4 cars, and basically because I'm the new boy, they're all just giving me a hard time. I've got only allowed to overtake on the left is what I was told. Absolutely no question, only overtake. I've now got cars coming all around me, just brake testing me, and it was just like my first day at school. But yeah, but actually a lot of those guys now have been, they were like my university years of instructing those days at Brands Hatch. They were magical, amazing camaraderie between those drivers. They were now famous touring car drivers were all part of that brigade, that band of brothers, if you will, of lads at Brands Hatch. Amazing camaraderie and still tremendously good friends to this day. Well, the instructor went on longer than you wanted it to do, and I wanted to go and do some. I needed to do some racing, otherwise I was going to go back to selling or get into IT or whatever it was going to be. But because my chosen career wasn't really to be an instructor full time. Because I was trying to get into GTs because GT racing was now on the up. It was sports car had died a little bit. From the days of the big sports car racing, and they'd all gone a bit quiet. And now GT racing was now really starting to get some momentum, and that's where I could see now that I could get a career perhaps in GT racing, so that's where I wanted to go to. If I was going to get a career, perhaps it would have been GT racing. Joined with fantastic name in Hugh Chamberlain, great guy. And we then ended up in British GT racing the XJ 220s, which was great. We turned up and we were looking all very splendid in our cars. Looked amazing. We had the money to do everyone had the right racing suits, and we looked turning up in the scene. As I say, GT was now on the up. And we looked the part. For the GTs. Looked the part. Weren't quite quick enough, as we were perhaps on the wrong. We didn't have the best tyres and stuff, but we made it work. Got into the podium a few times, and we did okay. Worked our way through, but I thoroughly enjoyed this GT racing. That really sort of hit the spot for me. Well, I'd never driven a GT car, and I remember going. I think we did half a day's test before the first race. So it ended up at Doddington. Actually, I hadn't actually driven the car before the first race. So our first drive in the car was going out for practice. So we had a practice session, then a qualifying. Sorry, 2 qualifying sessions and the race. And I went out, first drove the car in that first qualifying session. And I thought, my goodness, this is a bit quick. 600 brake horsepower. I've never driven anything like that sort of power before. I remember going through Craner curves and thinking, my God, this is a huge, big, wide, long car. I could feel the chassis move down Craner curves. As you're going down, you could almost hear it go. You could hear it creaking. It's so big. But then going through the bottom of Old Hairpin there, and just stamping on the power and seeing what would happen, and looking in the mirrors, these 2 huge black lines have been left out the corner. I'm thinking, this is amazing. I've never driven this sort of power before. So yeah, that was a big eye opener. Well, that was with because I was with Chamberlain doing the British Championship in the Jaguars, and the plan was to then go into we were going to do the FIA GT and Le Mans the following year. And Le Mans is something I really wanted to do. I had the sponsor, been working with the sponsor for the year, and we had our plans what we were going to do the next year. And I remember we went out for dinner at the end of the year with the sponsors, and went to quite a famous curry house in London, and just end of season sort of catch up on what we're going to do, plans for next year, etc. What I subsequently learnt is that earlier that day, the sponsor had a phone call from a very famous world champion Grand Prix driver that had his son, Paul Stewart, had a junior teams. They're in Opel Lotus and Formula 3, and suddenly he came in and basically just whipped the sponsorship from under our nose. I was furious. I was angry. I was upset. All the emotions really of how can anyone have the audacity to go and just take someone else's sponsor like that? Lesson learned. Jo's always been part of my life right from that moment. So she's always been there for me and supporting me, which is just amazing, really. But so we've been through all of that together. So she's seen me really struggle and really push hard to try and get the sponsorship, get the drives, get out there, etc. And but she's supported me through the whole time. She's never waned from that. So which is just it's testament to her. She's amazing to stick by me and through all of that. So yeah, it's quite incredible. We ended up doing the support race for touring cars, which is the Vector Challenge, and at the same time as well, we just had. That was a year before. We just had our first child. Annabelle just been born. I don't know whether it was having firstborn around that changes drivers. Some people say it does, others say it doesn't. But along with a frustrating year as well, I kind of reached the end really of really wanting to race. I was kind of enjoying being around racing, but I wasn't really enjoying the race. Didn't enjoy the car, and it just wasn't a lot of. I didn't find the fun in it anymore. And from having raced GT cars and sports cars, and then racing this front-wheel drive, it just didn't have the magic about it anymore. It wasn't really inspiring me. It didn't really, get into the soul of what I had experienced as being a driver. Throughout all my time of racing, I've been around events, so instructing all the different manufacturers and different experience days, etc. I'd always been around racing and events, so people coming to events and having a great time doing whatever they were doing at racing events. I'd been involved with a karting company, Daytona, who I was part of their management team for a couple of years as well. So again, that was very much taking the whole event stuff, all the racing, and being part of Daytona, who do a fabulous job. But also seen race car simulation was really coming to the front and was getting a lot more sophisticated into what you could get from a race car simulator. So I was watching this technology come about, my experiences from all the different racing events. So I was trying to think, how can we really pull all this together? So again, it's still that kind of get up and do kind of mentality of I like to make things happen. So I worked with a company doing what my idea was of how it could come together. I wanted to do it better. I wanted to do it really well presented, and so then had an investor, and we created the Race Hut. So the Race Hut, the first one we built was end of 2012, and we built that in Slough, which is still running very successfully today. And that's very much bringing all of that knowledge of motor racing, of events, of what people like to get at an event, be it from a kids' party to a corporate day out, experience, whatever it might be. But it's combining all that knowledge I've had, experience over the years, and bringing it together into a nicely presented venue. And that's exactly what we do. So we built Slough and built that up over the years. So we have league events, and we have do loads of corporate activities, and we do kids parties, etc. And then from that, we've now managed to build Oxford, where we are today. So we've got a 16-pod venue here, all triple screen pods here. And again, it's the same thing. We do the corporate activities, and that's really coming together nicely now. And so we've got good plans for the future of how we want to build it. And this is very much now what I do, and how we're going to build it. There's more technologies which we'd be able to incorporate into what we do here. So the idea is that whatever level you want to come in at, you know, part of a corporate day out, is that what is it like to try and get the best out of your driving at a qualifying session, in a race session. You know, take it from people who get, you know, in the leagues, who are, you know, really serious about getting the very best out of the situation and being competitive, to a very relaxed corporate event where you might be racing the lady from accounts and the young man from sales, and we're all having a good time together, but competitive, safe fun. And that's what we do. We bring that whole package together for. I think there's been a lot of ups and downs through my life of racing, of not racing, of doing bits and pieces. Would I change it? No. So I've done, you know, I set out that I wanted to race cars. I've done that. You know, didn't reach the levels that I wanted to reach. I didn't earn my fortune out of racing cars, but you know, thoroughly proud of what I did achieve in racing. And I've done it all off my own back. So that's so I should feel pleased with that, and now I have a successful business, still involved in motor racing. So would I change any of it? No. Just keep on pushing.